Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to CafeBTW, a gaming morning podcast. I'm Andy, your host, aka Love Retro BTW on Twitter and CafeBTW on YouTube. Welcome to our 107th episode of CafeBTW, a gaming morning podcast. I've decided to finally keep track of these actual episode numbers and how many episodes we've done. So going forward, we are going to be putting the episode number attached to the actual episode so that we can keep track of how many episodes we've done. And according to my math, we've done 107 live streams. So that means every time we've, done an episode, we've done a live. So we've been doing this podcast since early 2020, going on, 3 years, 107 episodes. Obviously, I can't go live every Saturday like I used to, but I do have about 3 guests coming up in the next few weeks. But I will be going on hiatus for a small hiatus again because I will be traveling to New York and also Boston. So a lot of stuff going on. But here we are today on a wonderful Saturday morning. I'm glad to be back. It's been a while. I saw some friends in chat already like Genzo and Phantom Cat Punch and No Fear. Thank you all for joining me this fine morning. So this is going to be an interesting episode. Don't think we've talked about the Game Gear too much, but I've been on kind of like a kick where I've been really focusing on collecting the Game Gear. So today it's going to be a little bit of a mix of my experience with the Game Gear growing up. We're going to do a little bit of a history lesson about the Game Gear. We're going to talk about some Game Gear games. We're going to talk about why the Game Gear kind of failed when it was released in the 90s and why it had a lot of trouble because of the Game Boy. And a lot of the reasons why the Game Gear was made was because they wanted to go against the Game Boy. So there's a lot of that back and forth between the handheld kind of wars in the early 90s between Nintendo, Sega, but we will talk about Atari Lynx a little bit and also mention the NES Turbo Express because these were handhelds that came out on the market to kind of compete against the Game Boy, but we will be focusing on the Game Gear. But before we get into that, we got some dirty laundry to do, and of course, as you know, on Twitter, I run the retro gaming community. If you'd like to join and you're not a part of it and you happen to be on Twitter, check out my pinned tweet at the top. The retro gaming community is right here. You just want to invite and I will let you in as long as your account doesn't scare me. And what's really cool is we are doing our, what month are we in? May giveaway. We're actually giving away a Saturn game, one of the greatest Saturn racers ever made, or Sega racers. Honestly, like one of the best console racers at its time, Sega Rally Championship. And the giveaway is simple. If you're in the group, you just answer the question that I've asked. It's, share your favorite racing game of all time. You could see that people have already entered by giving their reasons or games that they like. Never gave away a Saturn game before, and I think this is one that is worth joining. So if you want to be a part of the retro gaming community and also join the giveaway, we try to do giveaways every month. A lot of the times I'm doing giveaways based on my own collection and duplicates I have. So a lot of the games that we give away in the retro gaming community are from my heart to you. So this month we're doing Sega Rally. What's up, Manny? Good morning. Welcome to the Cafe BTW. I must say the retro gaming community we haven't had a lot of trolls. We've been really in control of it. We are now over 2.2 thousand members. That's pretty incredible. Whether you're lurking or participate, it doesn't matter. We would love anyone to join. Remember, that is hanging out at the top of my Twitter. It's the pinned tweet. Of course, we do have believe it or not, I do have a YouTube, which is funny. We're on our 107th episode of Cafe BTW, a gaming morning podcast. I don't think I started a YouTube until a year ago, which is really funny. We've been doing this podcast for quite some time, but if you want to watch some former episodes, they are here and available right at the top. Also, I'm starting to do a couple of long form pieces and up there today. And Genzo, I don't know if we want to put this on a timer, but I've dropped an awesome video I did at the SoCal Retro event. I've kind of been wanting to do long form again, But let's watch the intro. This was my experience at SoCal Gaming Expo. You could watch the full video. It's 22 minutes long, so it's kind of like a docu-style adventure. Me doing interviews on the floor. We'll show a little bit of that, but let me show you the intro. This is all edited by me and everything. So that's a little intro I did, and what I did was did a little voiceover. I'm not going to play that, but we can show you a couple of interviews just to give you a sense of this video. And what it was the SoCal Retro Expo is probably the biggest retro gaming focused expo in Southern California, and every year it's getting bigger. And I went this year like I did last year, and it was really fun. Met a lot of people, but let's do a couple of show you a few interviews I did. Here's the first one, Romeo, who is the owner of Retro Video Games. So let's go right to that so I can show you that. Culture. I focus on my experiences with you. That's my voice.
And my store is LA Video Games. I co-own it with my brother. His name is Abel Ambries. And what we do, we're a community-based store. And today we're here at SoCal Retro Gaming Expo trying to give back to the video game community, trying to give us some deals, and also some good vibes. I've been at SoCal for like going on 6-7 years. This is the biggest one we had so far. This is the biggest booth we ever had. Every year it gets better and better. I look forward to seeing the community, so many familiar faces and new faces. With likes of the Super Mario movie, Super Nintendo World, Universal Studios, more shows like The Last of Us, Twisted Metal shows. As video games are going more into mainstream pop culture, I don't see collecting ever stopping, slowing down, or decreasing in price. I actually see way more expensive than what it currently is.
And here's another one. Mars Retro Gaming, Marlena.
Yeah, I mean, I spent like over 10 years working in a used media store. You know, I grew up working swap meets, so I kind of like was in that headspace already. But definitely the pandemic, I worked in the AV industry and in hotels and convention centers. We were the first ones furloughed, the last ones to come back. Yeah, I think we're here and good for a good while. You know, our generation, millennials, Gen X, Zennials, we now have like a little bit of income, and we're looking to, you know, make our lives fulfilled somehow through physical material means. So yeah, I think we're gonna just kind of plateau and ride it for a while.
And then the last one I'm gonna show you is a really cool one.
Saturday at 90.
His name's Eric, and I'll let him do the talk. Here you go.
My name's Eric Schreiner from here, Southern California, and I was actually an OG back in the day for the Nintendo World Championship back in 1990 in the East Coast, the city of Boston, actually. So this year is actually the little brochure they gave out when you first went in. It kind of covered games, what the event was, everything like that. It was exciting. It took a lot of convincing, you know, get my parents to bring me down. And it was a 2-day thing. I made it to the semifinal, and I made it right down to the wire. And it was 3 games you had to play: Super Mario Brothers, collect 50 coins, and then a couple of laps in Rad Racer, and then the big one was Tetris. It came down to the last minute. I was getting ready to get a Tetris. It was a photo finish. They thought I won it, and then they had to do a double take, and somebody beat me. I was like, oh, just by a couple hundred points, but it was pretty exciting.
So yeah, so as you can see, it's very docu-style. I get a really good sense of the retro gaming community. That was really cool. This guy I totally ran into, and he's like, hey, I was a contestant at the 1990s Nintendo World Championship. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Can I talk to you about that? Also, probably the funniest moment was when I bought a a Sega Netlink adapter from Pat the NES Punk, which was really cool. He had a Sega NES. He had a Sega Saturn. Sega Link adapter, which basically allowed you to search the internet back on the Sega Saturn, so you could send emails and you could see it right here. But I bought it from him, and that was really cool. But this is, if you're interested in this video, it's on my YouTube. And finally, before we get into the news and also to the episode, do want to say that if you see here, right now, I submitted my max out run for TNC Surf Designs Wood and Water Rage, where the highest rank and way that you get measured in this game is on the scoreboard in Twin Galaxy is maxing out the score. I did a run in TNC, and right now I'm up for a vote. So as you can see here, I did a full video run of TNC Surf Designs, and I played Wood and Water Rage until I could max out the score. So you can see I played it here. I submitted it. So right now I'm in the voting process. What's interesting about Twin Galaxies, you can't see who's voted for you, how many people have voted for you. So right now, crossing fingers that I get approved. I'm on the leaderboard. There's only 6 people who ever submitted scores for TNC Surf Design. So if I get this to go through, I'll be on the list as one of the best TNC Surf Design players in the world, I guess. It's a score that I've been really trying to get in here because it's one of the few games I can actually do a record in. So just cross your fingers for me, because I'm really hoping that this Twin Galaxy thing works out and I get the score up there. But anyway, let's do a little bit of news. All right, so Tears of the Kingdom came out, so we can't talk about not talk about news. And by the way, if you've ever been to my show, we do talk about retro games, but we like to talk a little bit about some modern news and jump into a few things. So today, I'm going to talk about how 10 million copies of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom have been sold. And this was posted in May 17th, so this was 3 days ago that they said that there was 10 million copies of this thing sold. That is incredible. And I must say, I've been watching people on Twitch, just watching the love for this game, all the unique, things you could do in it. Once again, Nintendo has not failed us and released a AAA game with little to no issues. They've really taken a platform that's been out for 6 years, and even when it came out, the Switch, it really wasn't the most powerful thing in the world. Yet here we are 6 years later, and we still have this phenomenal open world game that is just what Nintendo delivers. What's up, DMC? Welcome to the cafe. Drink coffee, of course. I'm running out of coffee, actually. But there you go. Thanks for redeeming the drink coffee 500 points. But yeah, pretty incredible. If we're going to talk about the news, we can't, not mention the success that Tears of the Kingdom is having right now. I have not played it yet. I've watched plenty of streams. I've watched kind of some 10 things to do when you get into Tears of the Kingdom. Those videos? So they're like, here, 10 things I should have done when I started Tears of the Kingdom, stuff like that. And then another kind of interesting, it was kind of soft on news this week. I don't want to talk about the Microsoft acquisition stuff with Blizzard and stuff, but Sega did come out and say after Sonic's movie success that Sega is interested in doing more IP movies. Obviously with the Super Mario Bros. Movie and the success that we've seen there. Sega wants to take some of their well-known IPs beyond Sonic the Hedgehog and make more movies. So, we're kind of hitting this stride of video game adaptations becoming just really popular. There was a time in the early 90s that video game adaptations became huge, and they were coming out left and right, whether it was the Super Mario Bros. Movie from 1993 or the Street Fighter movie or the Mortal Kombat movie, though those movies are considered not as great, but also nostalgic and cult classics in their own right. I actually thought the original Super Mario Bros. Movie was fine. And it had its issues, of course, but it was still cool. That said, of course, you could know The title of this episode is the Sega Game Gear. We're going to be talking a lot about the history of the Sega Game Gear, kind of like the things that we want to talk to today, learning a little bit about the Game Gear, a little bit of the history. With me, I, in 1989, got a Game Boy, of course, like everyone else. But when the Genesis came out, and then they talked about bringing the Game Gear and the portable system that had a color screen and a backlit screen, that was a big difference than the Game Boy, or at least it excited us. But there was a lot of reasons why the Game Gear, where it was fun, there's a lot of limitations and things that weren't so great about it. But as you can see, these are actual photos of a Game Gear I own. So this is an actual beautiful little Game Gear I own. I have a hell of a collection now. I've really started to build it out. I've gotten a lot of things over these years, but let's read a little bit of some factual stuff that I put together here. So the Sega Game Gear was released in 1990s. It was often remembered as a significant part of the golden era of the handheld gaming. It's remembered for its backlit color screen, a feature that was ahead of its time and set apart a lot of its competitors, particularly the Nintendo Game Boy. Even though the Game Gear wasn't a commercially successful handheld as some of its rivals, it holds a special place in many gamers today. For some, it represents nostalgia, bringing back memories of their first foray into handheld gaming. For others, particularly game collectors and retro enthusiasts, the Game Gear is a valuable piece of the gaming history, regardless of what it is. So today, many people appreciate the Game Gear for its role in the evolution of portable gaming technology. It's seen as a stepping stone. Let me put this up here so we can put some games up here. It was considered a stepping stone that contributed to the development of more advanced handheld systems. The Game Gear library, which includes many classic Sega titles, is beloved by many for its contribution to gaming culture. And I will agree with that. But there was a lot of issues for this thing. There was an uphill battle for the Game Gear, right? It wasn't an easy climb for this thing, especially at the time. Like, it was not going to be a cut and dry release. You were going up with the big boy Game Boy, right? So the Game Boy had come out, and this is actually, I wanted to play this. This is a really unique, this is, I believe, the first ever Game Boy commercial. It was a Japanese commercial, but I kind of like the music in it, so we're going to play it. But we can't talk about the Game Gear without kind of like the rivalry between the Game Boy versus the Game Gear. So that said, let me play this commercial real quick. 29 seconds.
Searching for good times. Are there any cosplays? Game Boy 専用ソフトスーパーマリオランド対戦型ベースボールケーブルをつなぐとファミコンでは味わえなかった面白さ
Yo, what's up, Floyd? Welcome to the cafe, man. Good to see you, dude. So Game Boy, let's talk about the Game Boy, because you can't talk about the Game Gear without talking about, the power of the Game Boy and what it did to disrupt the industry. So just to give you a sense of how many Game Boys were sold. So the original Game Boy released in 1989, and including the release of the Game Boy Color, collectively sold 118 million units worldwide, which is pretty crazy, right? So the Game Boy comes out, but let's not forget there's a few other handheld consoles that have to be mentioned in the line in this time period, because this really was kind of like an interesting explosion of the competitive market of the handheld gaming. So the Atari Lynx actually was released in September of 1989, the same year as the Game Boy. It was notable for being the first handheld gaming system to feature a color LCD display. The Lynx was originally developed and then taken over so there was another company called EPYX, and I don't want to butcher the name, but it was actually created by them, and then Atari took over and purchased it. Despite its innovative features, it faced a tough competition, obviously, with the Game Boy's release, which was released the same year, and the Game Boy was obviously significantly cheaper and has a way longer battery life. So one game I remember playing on the Lynx, which I actually had a Lynx, by the way, was the California Games. California Games was awesome on the Lynx, or at least I thought it was. I still remember being on a car ride this is before the Game Gear. I had a Lynx, and this game was so good. I loved playing this game. Well, as much as I could play it. So another handheld that you can't talk about this whole handheld era is one of the more expensive handhelds at the time, which is the Turbo Express, which was literally, essentially, a mini TurboGrafx engine or PC engine, console in your hands. It came out in 1987, and in North America the same year as the Game Boy as well, in 1989. It played the same game cartridges, the Hue cards that you would get from your TurboGrafx 16, which was incredible. So you could literally take your TurboGrafx games and play them on. You could take your TurboGrafx games and play them directly on this thing. What's up, Silverhawk? Hey, good to see you, man. Love seeing you in the Cafe BTW. Oh, a lot of good friends coming in, saying what's up. Yeah, the Turbo Express, and today, you know how much a Turbo Express goes for? They're like $800, $900. Good luck trying to buy one. I mean, I want one, but at the time, in 1989, though, $299. That's pretty expensive in 1989. So it goes to show you, that's a lot. Silverhawk says, I haven't seen you in a while. How are you, bro? Oh, yeah, I've been on a little bit of a hiatus. We're here. We're still kicking. Listen, this is the 107th episode of Cafe BTW Morning Podcast. We're not doing it every Saturday. We're going to open the cafe when I can open it, but I'm here. I'm still kicking. Good to see you, man. Okay, so, and I'm going to show you a video. This is actually a little bit of the collection. I've been focusing on Game Gear lately. So this is a little bit of a peek of my actual collection. I got tons of games right now. And here's the kicker about the Game Gear right now, right? In the public market right now, not a lot of people are focused on the Game Gear. So Game Gear games are very affordable. Like, we're talking about, you can get a Game Gear game from anywhere between $5 to $15. Obviously, you have games like Mega Man and Tails. By the way, there's a solo Game Gear Tails game, which is amazing. Those games could be upwards of $100, but you're not in the Super Nintendo range where games are like, Super Nintendo's ridiculous right now. Like, you can't get a good game on Super Nintendo without spending like 50 to 200, like, Chrono Trigger and Earthbound, for instance, like ridiculous, like $400 to $500 for cards. Like, what the hell? Anyway, let's get into a little bit more on the Game Gear. The Game Gear was conceptualized and developed as an answer to the many limitations that the Game Boy had. So that was kind of Sega's play, right? They're like, let's release something that goes against everything that the Game Boy does. So one of the most distinctive aspects of the Game Gear was this backlit full color screen, in contrast to the Game Boy's only featured monochromatic display. This was a huge selling point for the Game Gear, as it was significantly enhanced the gaming experience, making games more vibrant and engaging. The Game Gear also offered a larger, wider screen compared to the Game Boy. This provided gamers with a larger view of the games, making games more immersive. Sega also took into account during the design process, resulting in a horizontally oriented device, which gave you a better hold. So what they're saying is the Game Boy is up and down, right? And you're kind of like this. With the Game Gear, your hands kind of came out. And if you think about it, besides the Lynx, at the time, that's kind of like where we've gone with handhelds. If you look at the Switch today, you're holding it horizontally. You're not holding it up and down like the Game Boy used to. Phantom Cat Punch says, Ethan Slurpee, is that commercial is awesome. Oh yeah, totally. He was in that's the guy from Mallrats that says a schooner is not a sailboat or whatever. Or I'm saying that wrong, but so what did the Game Gear retail for? It actually retailed for $149.99, which at the time wasn't that bad. Hey Jan, good to see you. Which wasn't that bad, like that's definitely not too bad, like $149, okay, doable at the time. But let's get into a few other things here that I pulled up. So you could see here a good look at the actual thing. Let's read a few specs here. So the resolution was 160 by 144. The colors were 496. Colors on the screen were 32 different colors. Power requirements were 6 AA batteries, or a 9-volt 850 amps if you want to charge it. Sound, a mono speaker, stereo headphone jack, and it released 390 games in the US. Silverhawk says, I actually got my Game Gear for free from a close friend. Even got the Game Genie with the book. Yes, there was definitely a Game Genie that came with it as well. One thing that's been probably one of the most notable problems with the Game Gear is obviously the battery life. So, in fact, the Game Gear earned a reputation as the battery sucker. Operating on 6 AA batteries, the console could drain them in just a few hours of gameplay. This was a stark contrast to the main competitor, the Game Boy, which could provide up to 10 to 15 hours play on just 4 AA batteries. So that is a huge, I mean, you literally could play like 3 to 4 hours with 6 AA batteries on the Game Gear. With the Game Boy, you got 10 to 15 on 4. So, you know, what happened to this thing where Game Gear's like, oh, we're going up against Game Boy, but, you know, we got to have more batteries. That was a problem. That was a big, big problem. Another problem in the modern market is that the Game Gears aren't holding up as much as they used to. If you go out into the wild, a lot of Game Gears just don't hold up. Buying one today is risky because they weren't built for the long haul. You know, that's a major problem, is that there's a lot of Game Gears out there, and trust me, I've been out there. And what's up, Ryan, for the Gamers Week podcast? Good to see you, man. So the Game Gear, if you notice out in the market, there are a lot of Game Gears that just aren't working really well and have to be modded, or people are fixing them. It goes to show you, like, you look at a Game Boy and you can get an original Game Boy and it's in great shape. But for the most part, these Game Gears are falling apart. So let's talk about another really fun part of the Game Gear are the accessories. So I have a list here of accessories I want to talk about. So the Game Gear AC adapter, due to the console's notorious battery life, the AC adapter was a common and almost essential accessory. It allowed gamers to play the Game Gear without batteries as long as they had access to power. And also to note, you could use the Genesis adapter or plug on the Game Gear. I'm pretty sure that you could use a Genesis plug on the Game Gear for power. The Game Gear car adapter, obviously for road trips, similar to the AC adapter, the car adapter was another solution to the Game Gear's battery issue, allowing gamers to power their console using a car cigarette lighter. It was handy accessory for the time. Silverhawk says, wait, no, this is just a video I pulled off the YouTube. This is not, I do not have these complete unboxes, although I do have a ton of Sega Saturn stuff. No, but this is a video I'm just using to showcase these. So then there was the Game Gear battery pack. This rechargeable power source was another attempt by Sega to address the console's short battery life. It could be recharged and reused, offering more cost-effective and eco-friendly options compared to the consistently replacing disposable batteries. The Game Gear TV tuner, which is really cool. And by the way, I'm going to show you this really funny Joe Montana commercial. Let's watch this with the TV tuner.
Thanks! I created the ultimate football video game because I control Joe Montana! Wait! I control his strategy! Stop!
Game Gear already does that.
It's a lie!
It's true. Call, play, scramble, pass and score with Joe Montana football on Game Gear.
But mine's also a color TV!
And this optional TV tuner turns Game Gear into a color TV.
Good pass!
Nice reception, too.
Game Gear from Sega. It's true. Call, play.
So let me just pull that part up. So that was kind of the neat thing, is that the Game Gear had the TV tuner. Obviously, it wouldn't work today, but I heard that there is a way you could take the TV tuner and you could hook up your cable to it. Like, you could connect your TV into the tuner and get it to work today. So you could play like something through the TV tuner onto your Game Boy. Uh, so let's read a little bit about the TV tuner. Perhaps one of the most unique accessories was the TV tuner. It turned the Game Gear into a portable television, allowing users to watch broadcast TV right on their Game Gear screen. While it was primarily useful before the advent of digital television at the time, it was novel and an impressive feature. Absolutely. Retro Game Brew says, DMC says it allowed AV. Yes. Ryan says, my mom wouldn't buy me a TV tuner. Wanted it so bad. Manny says, they don't make commercials like that anymore. They don't. Silverhost says, if the Game Gear battery life wasn't so horrible, it could have killed the Game Boy. I never had one growing up, but I stayed at my aunt's house a lot and played it I played it all the time. Jan says, absolutely not. Having to actually pay actors at something more than gig wages. That's funny. Another accessory that I should talk about. Let me go back to this video. Is the Game Gear Master System converter. This was a cartridge-shaped device that allowed you to play the Master System games on your Game Gear. Given the extensive library of the Master System, this accessory significantly expanded the range of your games that could play on the handheld. And that's something I've been looking for in the wild. That's really cool to be able to play Sega Master Systems on your Game Gear. That's pretty neat. So let's get back into the war between the Game Boy and the Game Boy versus the wonderful Game Gear. So let's talk a little bit. I wrote a couple of things here. The Game Gear, despite its advanced features, sold around 11 million units worldwide throughout its lifespan. On the other hand, Game Boy's significant longer battery life and iconic game titles helped it reach a staggering 118.69 million units sold, if that includes the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, as Nintendo does in their official sales figures. The discrepancy can be attributed to several factors, including the Game Boy's longer battery life, a lower price point, and incredible power and iconic game Tetris. Although the Game Gear offered a color screen and had the backing of some strong titles like obviously Sonic the Hedgehog, it was not enough to overcome the Game Boy advantages. It's important to note, though, that while the Game Gear didn't outsell the Game Boy, it was still successful in its own right. It remembers fondly. I remember fondly by its color screen, and it's remembered fondly by its color screen and its library of games, and it's played a critical role in pushing the boundaries of what was expected of handhelds at the time, which is totally accurate. The Game Gear, you got to give credit. Yes, the battery life might have been the real big crux, and someone just followed me. Yo, what's up? YVR Retro, thank you so much for the follow. Really appreciate it. Silver says the Game Gear was also good as a self-defense tool. If you were being attacked, it would doubles as a brick. Well, yeah, I guess you could use it as a brick as well. So it's also important to note, though, while the Game Gear didn't outsell the Game Boy, it's still considered kind of like an iconic handheld at its time. Ryan says, I was definitely not a Sega kid, but the Game Gear introduced me to IPs I was missing. Very good point. Very good point, Ryan. So what we're going to talk about now is let's talk about, despite the Game Gear's technical superiority over its main competitor, the Nintendo Game Boy, several factors contributed to the downfall. So let's talk about, beyond the battery life, which we'll talk about again, what other factors really forced the hand that it wasn't as successful as, say, the Game Boy at the time. So obviously battery life, number one. The Game Gear's major drawback was a short battery life. It required 6 AA batteries that could drain in about 3 to 5 hours of gameplay, in contrast to the Game Boy, which we said before was 10 to 15. High price point. The Game Gear was significantly more expensive than the Game Boy, which put off potential buyers, especially parents and younger gamers. The cost of the batteries were additionally an issue because you had to buy 6. Game libraries. Although the Game Gear had a respectable library of games, including popular Sega franchises, it couldn't compete with the Game Boy's iconic, hugely popular titles, notably Pokemon and Tetris. Number 4, marketing. Nintendo's marketing for the Game Boy was more successful. Sega's approach, while aggressive, was not as effective in positioning the Game Gears as a must-have device. And finally, number 5 for the downfall was the design, actually. The Game Gear's larger size and heavier weight compared to the Game Boy made it less comfortable and convenient for the handheld gaming, especially for extended periods. What's up, Video Game Restoration? Good to see you in chat. So we have about 5 factors that we can take a look at and really say, here's why the Game Gear might not have been successful. Here's why the Game Gear might have fell apart. And to read YV Retro says, yes, Game Gear is the best console to collect for me at the moment. Awesome boxes and still affordable compared to the other consoles. I love collecting it right now too. So let's review that. 5 reasons for the downfall. Battery life, number 1. Number 2, high price point. Number 3, the game library. Number 4, the marketing. And number 5, the design. These are very important factors. Now, while the Game Gear had many positive qualities and certainly left its mark on the world of handheld gaming, these factors collectively led to its decline, eventually discontinuing it in 1997. Nonetheless, it remains a memorable part of gaming history, and its innovations have contributed to the evolution of the handheld gaming market. I can agree with that, and I think a lot of people can agree with that, especially like YVR said, you know, Game Gear is very collectible right now. It's affordable. There's a lot of people not focusing on it. When I was at SoCal Retro Expo, honestly, barely Game Gear games on people's tables, hardly any. And that just tells me that not a lot of people are focusing on it. So if you're interested in collecting for the Game Gear, now is the time, because I bet you in about a year or two, people are going to start putting their eyes towards it, and it's going to get more and more expensive to collect for. I believe Silverhawk, there's about 390 American run games. I personally started collecting Game Gear heavily last year, and now my Game Gear collection is kind of crazy. And we'll go back to, I'll show you, let's see if I can find where it is. These are actual photos of my collection. Let me show you. Obviously, these are some of my games. Sonic Triple Trouble. This is a good look at... This is actually from a few months ago. It's a lot larger now. And I'm also collecting a lot of complete in box games, which are really hard to find. So if you see a Game Boy complete in box game out there and it's affordable, these are from yesterday. I actually picked these up at Retro Respawn. He hooked me up because he said, I have these sealed sport games. Do you want them? I'm like, yes, I'll take them. Also, probably the one to note here, though, is Slider, which is a game that a lot of people probably don't know. It's a very good game. But I also love collecting sport games. And he's like, hey, I don't think anyone wants these sealed sport Game Gear games, but I do. And I love the kind of like pink, purple boxes. I love the color scheme. Really cool. Let's see, video game restorations, especially with modding. Yes, and of course, a person like video game restoration is definitely a modder out there. Retro Game Brew says, I had that Game Gear carrying case. Yeah, and Ryan, it's very... it's totally a recognizable carrying case, really one of the more popular ones. There's a lot of them out there, actually. Silver says, I even have a Game Gear case as well. And I recommend them. They're awesome, except mine is overflowing right now. That said, let's go back. Let's talk about real quickly. Let's just go through kind of like a list of the top 50 Game Gear games. Space Harrier, which is really fun. Master of Darkness, Echo the Dolphin. And this gives you a good sense, if you don't know about the Game Gear and the type of games that were on the Game Gear, this is a good list to give you an idea. Hey, what kind of games were even on the Game Gear if you never even owned one? Joe Montana Football, which we saw the commercial for. James Pond 2. Lemmings. CJ Elephant Fugitive. I never played that one. G-Lock. World Class Leaderboard Golf. I love golf games. Sonic the Hedgehog 2, of course, Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament, Legend of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, let's see, Deep Duck Trouble starring Donald Duck. That's a pretty fun game. Waterboy 3, Dragons, let's see here, keep going. Fantasy Zone GG, The Chess Master, Mortal Kombat 2, Shinobi 2, Virtual Fighter Animation, which is a really interesting game, Sonic Drift 2, Fantastic Dizzy, Outrun, Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, Defenders of Oasis, Star Wars, Desert Strike, Shining Force. Really a lot of cool games, honestly. Like, I mean, look at these. And by the way, this is a solo Tails game. It's one of the more sought after games right now, and it's much. I think the Tails game is well over $100, but dude, it is fun. Let's see. Ryan says, I got one because I was a fan of Surf Ninjas. Yes, and in the movie Surf Ninjas, they use a Game Boy to solve like murder mysteries, I think. Axe Battler, pretty cool. Sonic the Hedgehog Triple Trouble. Super Monaco GP, Spider-Man versus the Kingpin, Sonic Chaos, F1, Shinobi, Jungle Strike, Columns, and we'll get to the final here. Streets of Rage 2 was on this, Rise Star, Gunstar Heroes, which is one I'm looking for. And then finally, you have ones like Super Off-Road, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, Dragon Crystal, The Lucky Time Caper starring Donald Duck, Sonic the Hedgehog, Prince of Persia, Road Rash, and the number one on this list is Land of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. So a lot of great IPs here. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and a lot of these games are great. And then, of course, whenever I do an episode, I ask people a question on Twitter. So let's hear from the actual wonderful world out there and the humans and how they feel it. This morning on Twitter, I said, the Sega Game Gear, did you win? Did it win your gaming heart or miss the mark? Wow, I can rhyme. So Sega CD Universe says, loved it as a kid. MK and Defenders of Oasis were my jam. Logical Frank says, it seems so cool, but the battery life was terrible, and that just ruined the Game Gear for me. Never ended up playing it much, and still don't. Andrew Nicholson says, sadly, it missed due to its chronic battery issues. Steve Barry says, I loved it personally, but it definitely had issues. The backlight screen was a plus. I had issues trying to see the Game Boy, even with the light add-ons, but the battery life sucked. And I ended up getting an AC adapter so I could save batteries whenever I could. Carmen Cuddles said, had it, loved it. Brandon Rass says, missed the mark because I never had one. This one's has a target emoji, so I would imagine that it hit the target for them. Kevin Connor says, I didn't like it. The Lynx was more attractive. Retro Machine said, fond memories playing MK2, Streets of Rage 2, and Shinobi on road trips using cigarette lighter adapter to avoid burning through batteries. Chris M. Cavert says, it was my portable system for a few years. And then Cecil the Dark Knight says, it had a soft spot in my heart. Granted, the battery life is left to be desired. However, I mainly used mine with an OEM AC adapter. And last comment we have here, and thanks everyone for submitting their opinions. And if you ever see a question on a Saturday morning, you can bet your butt that I'm going to read them on the show. Paradise says, totally had my heart. It was the first handheld as a kid, years spent playing all the Sonic titles, Batman, Jurassic Park, Rise Star, Star Wars, and more. The battery pack, travel case, wide gear, TV tuner, just great stuff. So as you can see, there's a lot of love for the Game Gear, for something that essentially failed as a game system. You know, it still has some success, and I think this day and age, like, a lot of people really appreciate it, a lot of people love it, and personally, I'm on a journey to collect and continue to do my best to support it and see what I could do. But I must say, it's something that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, and maybe like people like Video Game Restoration and a lot of restoration people, modders, like a lot of people are doing like retro gaming, Game Gear mods. There's a lot of different color ones out there. There's a lot of cool stuff, but if you're out there in the wild and you're starting to collect video games, or you do already collect video games, start looking at, you know, a few Game Gear games. If you see them, grab them, because, you know, eventually there was a time when Game Boy games were super cheap. Like, even complete in box Game Boy games were super cheap, and now they're like ridiculous. Like, some Game Boy games are just totally ridiculously priced. And forget about complete in box Game Boy games. They're and especially Pokemon Game Boy games. So remember, right now is the time to buy Game Gear games. You're watching this podcast in 2 years from now, it might not be as accurate, but on, you know, today, May 20th of 2023, it's time. The market is good for Game Gear. So if you're out there in the wild, be sure to check it out. So just to go back, I want to remind people before we end the show today, we have the retro gaming community on Twitter. If you want to join, come on in, join a safe place to share your love of retro gaming. On the top of my tweet, pinned to the Twitter, is my retro gaming community. All you do is ask to be invited. As long as your account isn't crazy, I will invite you in. We have over 2.2 thousand members now. It's incredible. And the people that are in here, there's some really great people that post, and it's okay if you're lurking. No need to post. You don't have to post every day, but if you want to be a part of it, we are doing our Sega Saturn giveaway this month that on May 29th, we will announce a winner randomly. All you have to do is go to the pin tweet in the community. Tell us what your favorite racing game of all time is to enter. And this Sega Rally Championship complete in box could be yours. Last month, we gave away Animal Crossing for the GameCube. This is our first Sega Saturn giveaway. I love it. So if you ever want to play one of the best racing consoles of all time, this is the game for you, and we're giving it away. This is from my collection. So a lot of these giveaways I do in the retro gaming community, I do as well. So another thing to mention is that I went to the SoCal Gaming Expo. On my YouTube, there's a full docu video where I do interviews, learn about the retro market, talking to people on the floor, learning about retro games from the people that are out there selling games. This is NES Complex, who's a big YouTuber. He was showing me his Super Mario Brothers towel. But if you want to see some interviews, learn about the retro culture through my lens, it's available on my YouTube right now. It's a 22-minute docu-style adventure. It's my first long-form piece, so please check it out. Any support would mean so much to me. I'm trying to grow my YouTube a little bit. And also just a reminder, if you missed the live show, I do want to say that, of course, we have all the old Cafe BTW episodes available, and I want to say hello to everyone on VOD. If you happen to make the live, it's a treat, but don't forget, really appreciate everyone that's watching this after the fact, because this is an episode that's available on YouTube as a full VOD after the live is done. I do want to say that I really appreciate everyone that supported my TNC Surf Design record. Right now, as you can see here, this is the leaderboard for TNC Surf Designs on Twin Galaxies. I submitted a run on video of maxing out the score at 999999 or whatever. That's way too many nines. But essentially, they're voting for me right now. Once the vote is accepted, I will be added to the list of the all-time great max out TNC Surf Design score. So if you happen to be on Twin Galaxy, send me a vote. I'm going to get there. We're almost closed. Now, what's crazy about Twin Galaxy, it's blind voting. So I can't see how many people are voting for me. People can vote against you and your score might not make it. But so far, I think that from people commenting, they voted yes for me. So hopefully, crossing fingers, we can lock that in and I could be a TNC championship. Well, the thing is, I'll send you the link in chat here, everyone, but you have to join Twin Galaxy in order to vote. But that is where you vote. You would vote on right here. There would be a voting button. So if you can vote, if you're on Twin Galaxy, definitely give you some love. I'm trying to get my name put up in the history books so that when I die, they'll know that Andy, aka Love Retro BTW, was one of the greatest TNC surf design gamers in the world. And that will mean the world to me because I suck at video games for the most part. And if you've watched a lot of my TikTok live streams, you'll know how much I love this game. You could also watch the full run is on my YouTube as well, right here. I put the whole run. It's an hour run. So
hi everybody, my name is Andy, aka Love.
Let me close this out. And I just want to say that I really appreciate everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Cafe BTW podcast this morning. That said, I'm going to leave you with one special message. I'm going to say that, remember, we only get one shot at this, so you might as well be nice to people. I'm Andy. This was Cafe BTW, a gaming morning podcast. I want to say that I really appreciate everyone that stopped by this morning. Remember, we're here almost every Saturday morning. I think we'll be back next Saturday. Really appreciate everyone. Remember, just enjoy yourselves, be nice to people, and remember that, life's really short, and it's getting shorter by the day. Until next time, I'm Andy, and this is Cafe BTW, a gaming morning podcast. Take care, everyone.